For decades, whispers floated through the marble corridors of the monarchy, quiet, cautious, and always cut short. There was something Diana left behind. Something she'd hidden away before her world was torn apart. A private vault, neither sanctioned by the crown nor acknowledged in official archives, was said to hold her most personal treasures. Not just glittering heirlooms, but a trove of handwritten letters, raw voice recordings, and family artifacts kept far from the curated halls of royal exhibitions. A place that held her truth. For years, no one dared disturb it. Out of respect? Out of fear? But all that changed when Queen Camilla, bolstered by her new stature, set her sights on that vault, determined to open it and, in her words, reframe Diana's story through a modern, royal lens. She claimed it was time for closure, but many saw it differently, especially one woman who had remained silent for far too long, Princess Anne. As Camilla's quiet push toward the vault began to pick up speed through private consultations, legal whispers, and palace briefings, there was growing unease. Catherine, ever composed, appeared visibly shaken during a walk with William. Something had shifted. The family's unspoken agreement to leave Diana's sanctuary untouched was being shattered. And William, torn between duty and devotion to his mother's memory, struggled to conceal the rage building behind his princely exterior. But in the shadows of royal drama, it was Anne Diana's unlikely but unwavering defender who prepared herself to act. Anne had always been the monarchy's iron spine, disciplined, blunt, and unapologetically principled. She had never chased the spotlight, but she had always observed, quietly storing truths behind sealed lips. Her loyalty to Diana, forged through shared frustrations and mutual respect, ran deeper than most ever realized. Behind palace doors, Anne had witnessed firsthand the pain Diana endured. And now, watching Camilla ascend higher into the crown's sacred spaces, she knew a line had been crossed. She would not allow the woman who had once been at the center of Diana's torment to repurpose her legacy, especially not by exploiting what Diana chose to keep private. Word of Camilla's plan spread quickly through the palace grapevine, unsettling even the most stoic staff. Anne's reaction was swift, though silent at first. She began making discreet inquiries confirming the existence, location, and legal standing of the vault. It wasn't mere curiosity, it was preparation. Because Anne understood better than anyone that this wasn't just about history, it was about control. Whoever opened that vault wouldn't just hold Diana's secrets, they would shape the public memory of her forever. And so the stakes rose higher. Behind the ornate doors of tradition and protocol, a storm was brewing. What lay inside that vault had the potential to upend loyalties, reignite grief, and redraw royal battle lines. And Anne, with years of restraint now burning into fierce resolve, was ready to do what no one else had dared: say no. But what triggered Camilla to break decades of silence and try to seize Diana's vault now at this moment in history? Behind closed doors, Camilla began to move with a precision that startled even those closest to her. With the weight of the Queen Consort's title behind her, she no longer had to ask permission to maneuver discreetly. In hushed meetings with royal legal advisors and senior archivists, she began laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most controversial royal maneuvers in decades. Her plan was simple on the surface: to gain official clearance to access Diana's private vault. But beneath the surface, it was a calculated strike. One aimed at redefining the narrative, reclaiming control over the legacy of the woman who had always lingered in her shadow. She cloaked her intent in lofty ideals: preservation of history, public transparency, a commitment to confronting the past. But those close to the throne knew better. This wasn't about legacy, it was about power. And Camilla, for the first time, believed she had enough of it to rewrite the story. To achieve her goal, she needed one critical endorsement: King Charles. And though he had once been the central figure in Diana's heartbreak, even he appeared hesitant. His silence in private meetings was telling. He neither fully endorsed nor opposed Camilla's efforts, choosing instead to retreat into the gray space of royal neutrality. But silence, in the palace, can be louder than words. As Camilla pushed harder, Charles's refusal to intervene only fueled her confidence. She believed the crown was bending in her favor. What she didn't anticipate was the growing resistance forming behind the scenes. News of Camilla's secret plan reached William and Harry almost simultaneously. Shock was immediate, followed by disbelief, then fury. For William, it felt like a betrayal of the very essence of his mother's memory. For Harry, it was yet another reminder that Diana's legacy was still under siege, even in death. The brothers, often divided in recent years, found themselves strangely aligned in this moment of crisis. But before either could act publicly, someone else had already been alerted to someone who knew the stakes more intimately than either of them: Princess Anne. A trusted palace insider, a woman who had served both Queen Elizabeth and Diana, delivered the news to Anne in a private conversation meant to remain forever off the record. But what was said in that room ignited something fierce in Anne's spirit. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She knew what this meant. Camilla wasn't just attempting to unearth old memories. She was trying to rewrite royal history on her own terms. Anne had spent a lifetime protecting the monarchy's deeper truths, often from within, often in silence. But this wasn't a moment for silence. It was a moment for defiance. Anne began preparing, quietly but relentlessly. If Camilla wanted to wage war with the past, she would first have to contend with a woman who had never bowed to drama, never surrendered to popularity, and never ever allowed sentiment to be manipulated. Because Anne understood something Camilla didn't. The vault was sacred. And just as Camilla believed no one would stand in her way, Anne emerged unshakable, unafraid, and ready to challenge everything. She didn't need fanfare. She didn't need a crown. She didn't even need the public's applause. But when Diana's legacy stood on the edge of betrayal, Princess Anne stepped forward with a fire that shook the very foundations of royal silence. The moment was behind closed doors. No press, no handlers, just two women, bound by blood and duty, staring each other down across a table thick with tension. Camilla had walked in expecting resistance, perhaps hesitation. What she got instead was a declaration that left the entire room frozen. 5 words, delivered without a tremor, burned through the air like a royal decree: "Not while I'm alive." The effect was instant. Advisors turned pale. Courtiers exchanged looks. Even Camilla, so often composed in the chaos of royal life, was caught off guard. For the first time, she saw that Anne wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just about a vault. This was about history, about wounds that had never healed, about Anne's own quiet allegiance to a woman the monarchy had failed. Few ever knew how close Diana and Anne had truly become in those final years. While the world saw frosty formality, behind palace gates Anne had offered something rare: respect. No pity, not performance, but a stern kind of sisterhood forged in shared frustration with royal constraints. And it was in those silent exchanges, often unnoticed, that Anne came to admire Diana's courage, her compassion, her raw honesty. So when Camilla, once the silent shadow behind Charles's downfall, sought to claim even a piece of Diana's untouched past, Anne felt the sting of betrayal rise like a tide. It wasn't just personal, it was generational. Anne had watched William and Harry grow through grief, their mother's absence shaping every step they took in the public eye. She had seen William's quiet pain when Diana's name was twisted by tabloids, Harry's fury when her memory was manipulated for politics. And now, with Camilla's influence unchecked and the vault under threat, Anne saw herself not merely as Diana's defender but as the protector of her son's history. No one else seemed willing to draw a line. So she did it, unapologetically and without negotiation. "Not while I'm alive" wasn't just defiance, it was a promise. That moment sparked unease throughout the palace. Royal advisors, long trained in neutrality, found themselves torn. Would they stand with the Queen Consort's authority or the Princess Royal's moral clarity? Behind the scenes, whispers began to surface. Some felt Anne had gone too far. Others believed she hadn't gone far enough. The hierarchy trembled, but no one dared challenge her outright. Not yet. Camilla, however, was seething, not visibly, but beneath her careful expression was a storm of humiliation and disbelief. How dare Anne defy her like this, so publicly, so boldly, so completely? And yet, Camilla didn't understand the full scope of what she was up against. Anne's declaration wasn't simply a burst of emotion, it was a calculated move, because Anne wasn't relying on words alone. She had something far more devastating waiting in the wings. Something buried by time, protected by blood, and endorsed by a monarch who once ruled without question. But Anne's declaration wasn't just emotional, It was strategic. And soon, she would reveal a power move no one saw coming. Long before the storm surrounding Diana's vault ever reached the headlines, Queen Elizabeth had already anticipated the battle. In her final years, frail in body but razor-sharp in mind, she quietly prepared for a conflict she feared would divide the very institution she had spent a lifetime protecting. She had seen the fractures forming, the rivalries bubbling beneath the surface. She understood that Diana's memory, so powerful and emotionally charged, would one day become more than a tribute, it would become a weapon. And she also knew that when that moment arrived, it would not be Charles, nor Camilla, nor even William who would be able to hold the line. It would be Anne. In a series of private conversations away from the press, the Queen made her intentions clear. Anne, ever the dutiful daughter, ever the silent sentinel, was entrusted with something no one else had earned. A secret deed, handwritten, sealed, and formally witnessed, granted Anne full custodial authority over Diana's personal legacy. Anything classified as deeply private, sentimental, or historically unfit for public curation. This was not a ceremonial gesture. It was a royal shield, designed to block any future attempt to exploit Diana's sacred memories for political gain or personal advancement. But like everything else in the Crown's labyrinthine world, it was buried beneath layers of silence and tradition, stored in a sealed box in Windsor's private vault until Anne knew the time had come. She retrieved it with quiet precision, the document still crisp, the wax seal unbroken. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was proof that Elizabeth had seen through the coming storm and had made her choice. With that deed in hand, Anne marched into a formal meeting already stacked in Camilla's favor. Camilla arrived with lawyers, advisors, and what she believed was an airtight legal strategy. She expected resistance, but she also expected victory. What she didn't expect was to be blindsided. When Anne placed the deed on the table, silence fell. The legal team scrambled, flipping through binders, searching for any precedent to challenge its authority. There was none. It was signed by a reigning monarch. It overrode any current royal decree. Camilla, for the first time in years, found herself powerless. The room turned tense, not just awkward but dangerous. Camilla's ambitions had collided head-on with the last will of the woman whose name still carried more reverence than any title. And while Anne never raised her voice, the message was unmistakable. The vault would remain untouched not because of a personal vendetta, but because the Queen had willed it so. That fact alone stripped Camilla of any moral ground she had hoped to stand on. But Camilla, humiliated and cornered, wasn't about to fade into quiet defeat. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. Her pride had been shattered, her authority undermined in a single stroke, and the entire court had witnessed it. The Queen Consort had just been outplayed by the Princess Royal. And now, she needed a counter-move. Something bold, something ruthless. Camilla wouldn't go down quietly. She was about to play her most dangerous card yet. If she couldn't win through dignity, she'd win through leverage. Camilla threatens the unthinkable using royal privilege to shake William's position in the line of succession. For a woman once cast as the outsider, Camilla had learned how power worked, and more dangerously, how it could be bent. After being humiliated by Anne's bombshell deed and denied access to Diana's private vault, something inside her shifted. She knew the palace ran on quiet alliances, subtle nods, and shadows that never spoke openly. So she went underground, not in defeat, but in cold calculation. She began whispering through her network of court insiders, stirring the most unthinkable question in royal history: was William truly fit to be king? It began in whispers, planted in elite social circles and private banquets, where Camilla's loyalists began suggesting that the emotional weight of Diana's death and William's deep connection to her had clouded his judgment over the years. Some dared to float the idea that his increasing openness about mental health and his disdain for outdated royal customs revealed a lack of stability for the crown's future. Within days, whispers turned into headlines. Tabloid leaks clearly fed from inside cast doubt on Diana's legacy itself, framing her as unstable, too emotional, too impulsive. The narrative being quietly threaded through the press? If the crown was built on a fragile legacy, then perhaps the heir standing on it was just as uncertain. The damage struck like a slow poison. Catherine, already shaken by the battle over the vault, was left reeling. She had spent years shielding her family from public dissection, but now their future was under direct attack. Her face, once resolute, now bore the cracks of quiet devastation. William, furious beyond words, felt the pull between protecting his wife and honoring royal protocol that chained him into silence. He could not publicly retaliate without causing a constitutional storm. And Camilla knew that. She had cornered him in a game he couldn't afford to play. But Anne wasn't bound by the same restraints. She moved swiftly, rallying discreet support in Parliament, reconnecting with former allies of Queen Elizabeth who still held influence behind the scenes. She didn't make speeches. She didn't give interviews. Instead, she worked with the same brutal efficiency she had wielded for decades, restoring the balance from within. She knew the institution better than anyone, and she knew how to force it to listen. But the emotional toll was beginning to show. For the first time in years, Anne appeared visibly worn. Her strength had not faltered, but the cost of protecting a memory and a legacy had begun to chip away at her stoic exterior. As the palace walls trembled under these silent wars, factions began to form. Those loyal to Camilla, often driven by self-preservation or ambition, began to distance themselves from William and Catherine. Others, emboldened by Anne's resolve, chose quiet resistance. Behind polished royal smiles, a civil war brewed, and Camilla, believing herself victorious, tightened her grip. But just as Camilla tightened her grip on the throne, the people made their voice heard, and it changed everything overnight. It started with a whisper, then roared into a movement. Millions rallied behind Anne, demanding that Diana's vault remain untouched. The monarchy hadn't seen this level of outrage in decades. At first, it was just a few murmurs online. Tweets, comments, a handful of emotional posts urging the palace to protect what belonged to Diana. But within 24 hours, those voices multiplied into an uproar. Hashtags like Stand With Anne and Protect Diana's Legacy dominated global trends. The very institution that once tried to silence emotion was now at the mercy of it. A tidal wave of public loyalty, not to the monarchy, but to Diana's memory, surged with unstoppable force. And it wasn't just digital outrage. People began gathering outside Kensington Palace, holding candles, photos, and flowers. The echoes of a heartbreak from decades ago had found new breath. What began as grief turned quickly into protest. The crowd grew, stretching down the palace gates with a quiet but unmistakable fury. Placards read, "Let her rest," "Hands off Diana," and "Anne speaks for all of us." The mood wasn't just emotional, it was unifying. Diana, even in death, had done what few royals could bring the people together. Then came the moment that changed everything. Catherine appeared at one of the vigils, unannounced, without security fanfare. Dressed simply, she laid down a white rose and stood silently among the mourners. That image, captured in a single still frame, shattered the internet. It became a symbol of resistance and remembrance. The monarchy's future queen, grieving beside its most beloved ghost. And while Catherine mourned, Camilla faced a very different reality. At every public appearance, jeers pierced through the forced smiles and rehearsed elegance. Boos, cold stares. Protesters chanting Diana's name. The carefully curated grace Camilla had worked years to craft was crumbling in the eyes of a public that refused to forget. Her face, once a symbol of quiet endurance, now seemed visibly shaken. Behind palace walls, she was cracking. The noise reached Parliament. Members, previously silent on royal affairs, began speaking out. One after another, voices called for the preservation of Diana's vault as a national legacy, warning that any interference would be viewed as a betrayal of public trust. The debate spilled into news panels, radio segments, and global headlines. Diana's memory had become a political flashpoint, and Anne, whether she intended to or not, had become its standard-bearer. Then came another moment that stunned the nation. Anne agreed to meet with the leaders of the public petition that had gathered over 3 million signatures. The meeting wasn't filmed, but word of her appearance spread like wildfire. It was described as warm, powerful, and deeply human. In that moment, Anne wasn't just the Queen's daughter, she was the people's defender, standing between Diana's memory and the machinery of power. Camilla, now isolated, knew the tide had turned. Her allies were falling silent. The press no longer followed her cues, and every move she made was watched with suspicion. She had been outmaneuvered, outmatched, and worst of all, outloved. With the world watching, Camilla was pushed into a corner, and in that corner, she made one last desperate demand. Face to face in a secluded wing of the palace, Camilla made her final plea. Anne's reply was so cold, so devastating, even palace guards were left speechless. It was a moment that shattered every rule of royal etiquette. Camilla, cornered, bruised by public backlash, abandoned by silent allies, did something no queen consort had ever dared. She broke protocol and requested a private, unscheduled audience with Princess Anne. No advisors, no aides. Just the two of them, in a chamber where silence carried more weight than ceremony. For all her calculated moves, Camilla was now operating from desperation. This wasn't a power play. It was a surrender disguised as a final gamble. As the door closed behind her, Camilla dropped the last of her composure. Her voice trembled as she said the words she had never spoken to Anne before. "I only wanted to be understood." In that instant, her years of strategy crumbled into something human, fragile, vulnerable, and raw. She spoke of isolation, of the burden of replacing a ghost, of feeling forever second best in the eyes of the people. She claimed she never wanted to erase Diana, only to coexist with her legacy without being hunted by it. The tears were real. The exhaustion is unmistakable. But Anne remained silent, unmoved, her eyes fixed not on Camilla's pain, but on what it had cost. When she finally spoke, it was with a force that cut through every excuse and every carefully crafted narrative. Anne's words weren't loud, but they carried the full weight of judgment. She spoke of loyalty not to bloodlines, but to truth. She reminded Camilla that legacy wasn't something one could reshape or reinterpret to suit their own narrative. Diana's vault, she said, wasn't left behind to be consumed by ambition. It was sealed in pain, preserved by love, and meant to remain that way. Then came the blow that ended the conversation before it truly began. Anne confirmed that the vault would never be opened, not now, not ever, not while she breathed. Camilla stood there, devastated, and for the first time, isolated not just from the public but from the royal machine that had once shielded her. All the influence she'd carefully cultivated meant nothing now. Anne had outlasted, outmaneuvered, and outwilled her. The queen consort broke down not in rage, but in quiet collapse. And in that painful silence, Anne revealed a truth she'd never shared aloud. "There was a time," she said, "when I tried to forgive you. When I wanted to believe that time could change everything, but then you reached for what was never yours, and that told me all I needed to know." The meeting ended without ceremony, without closure, and without a second chance. Camilla walked out not as a queen consort, but as a woman stripped bare by the one person who had never feared her title. Anne had spoken for Diana, for William, for the people, and, perhaps most painfully, for herself. But while the vault was safe, the storm had only just begun because inside it lay secrets even Anne didn't know existed. Locked for decades, sealed with heartbreak, Diana's final letters tell a story no one was ready to hear, and Anne, shaking, read every word. She had kept the key for years, tucked away in a drawer no one ever dared open. But now, with Camilla defeated and the public flame burning in Diana's name, Anne knew it was time to fulfill the quiet promise she had once made to the queen. Alone, without announcement or audience, she stepped into the space where Diana's vault remained untouched, its lock still bearing the royal seal, its contents protected by more than just protocol. It was protected by grief, by memory, by reverence. And with trembling fingers, Anne broke the seal, not as a princess, but as a sister-in-arms to a woman history never gave peace. What lay inside wasn't what she expected. The jewels were there, of course. So were the tape's hours of voice memos, likely too raw to ever be heard publicly. But in the very back, beneath a silk-wrapped box, Anne found them. A bundle of handwritten letters, neatly tied with a single strand of ribbon. The ink had faded, but Diana's voice leapt off the pages like it had been waiting for this moment. The words weren't just emotional, they were prophetic. In those letters, Diana described her fears not for herself, but for the future. She foresaw Camilla's rise, not with bitterness, but with piercing clarity. "If she enters," Diana wrote, "she will try to rewrite me, but I know Anne. She will not allow it. She never wavered when I cried. She won't waver now." The letter Anne couldn't stop rereading was addressed not to her but to Catherine. It was dated just weeks before Diana's death. "You must protect William," it read. "Not from Camilla, not from the crown, but from the shadows it casts. Love him as I never could. Hold him when the cameras stop. Remind him of who he is without the palace." Those words struck Anne deeper than she expected. It wasn't just a warning, it was a transfer of duty, from one royal woman to another. From Diana's broken heart to Catherine's still beating one. Anne continued reading, page after page. Diana's heartbreak over Charles was evident, not angry, not vindictive, but exhausted. "I gave him my youth," one letter read. "He gave me the cold." Yet even in her sadness, there was strength. Diana wrote of the people, of the children, of her hope that someday the monarchy would be led not by tradition, but by compassion. She even thanked Anne. A single line, barely visible at the bottom of a page. "Thank you for not looking away." By the time Anne reached the final letter, her eyes were wet. She didn't sob, she didn't tremble. But she whispered something under her breath, a vow, perhaps to never let these truths be weaponized, never let them be twisted. She returned the letters to their place, sealed the vault, and stood in silence for a long while. And as Anne locked the vault once more, one final twist emerged. Someone else had already seen the letters. Camilla should never have known about the vault. So who told her? The answer would shake Anne's trust and expose a traitor hiding in plain sight. For weeks, Anne had been haunted by a single question that refused to leave her alone. How did Camilla even know where to look? The existence of Diana's private vault had never been documented publicly. It wasn't listed in royal records or included in any official estate paperwork. It had been concealed with care first by Diana, then by Queen Elizabeth, and finally by Anne herself. So how did Camilla, with all her ambition but none of the lineage, even know it was real? The answer, when it came, cut deeper than she ever imagined. A series of internal security reports triggered a quiet investigation. Palace communications flagged subtle but suspicious activity of a former royal staffer requesting access to archived inventories without appropriate clearance. At first, it seemed like routine oversight. But when Anne cross-referenced names with those who had once served Diana personally, the puzzle began to take shape. The name that surfaced was unexpected, someone trusted, someone once beloved by Diana during her most vulnerable years. And someone who had, after Diana's passing, quietly transitioned to serve under Camilla's expanding influence. A bridge between two women who had never stood on common ground. And now, that bridge has become a back door. The betrayal hit Anne like a silent blow. This wasn't just about royal documents or vault keys. This was a wound to the memory of a woman who had already endured too much. Someone Diana confided in, someone she believed would protect her secrets, had opened the door to her greatest rival. Anne didn't summon the staffer publicly. She handled it in private, with precision. She laid out the evidence. There were no denials, no excuses, just quiet guilt and the sting of being found out. Anne demanded exile from all royal duties, effective immediately. Not just removal, but erasure. The crown would no longer carry the burden of misplaced trust. But even after justice was served, Anne knew it wasn't enough. The breach had happened. And while she had blocked Camilla, silenced the media storm, and secured Diana's truth from further exploitation, the damage lingered. She returned to the vault one final time. There, with no fanfare, she installed a new lock, symbolic and physical. The new protocol would require 2 signatures to ever open it again. Not hers, not Charles's, not even Camilla's. Only William and Charlotte. It was a decision rooted in hope, in trust that the future would be wiser with the past than the present had been. As she stepped back, Anne whispered her final vow not to the press, not to the palace, but to the memory of a woman still mourned across continents. The past is safe, and so is the future. Her words echoed with finality. Yet, behind the calm, Anne knew that royal peace was always temporary. The war over Diana's legacy may be over for now, but inside the palace, the echoes of defiance, betrayal, and royal reckoning still linger. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.